The Cold War was filled with civil wars and revolutions, and normally those civil wars would see the US-led West on one side with the communist world on the other. But when the Nigerian Civil War kicked off in 1967 and saw this region break away as the Republic of Biafra, the sides were much less clear. The Nigerian government was backed by the UK, the USA, sort of, the USSR and Israel, whereas Biafra was backed by the People's Republic of China, France, and also Israel. And given that both sides were such a confusing mess, this raises an obvious question. What on earth happened? Why did the Nigerian Civil War have such weird sides? So, like many conflicts in Africa during the Cold War, the roots of the Nigerian Civil War can be traced back to the end of colonial rule there. Nigeria gained its independence from Britain in 1963, and it was a very diverse country made up of many different peoples, whom Britain clumped together because it made the map look nicer. In the north, the largest region in the country, the House of Fulani people were dominant, and they were the ones who made up the majority of Nigeria's military and were predominantly Muslim. The Yoruba were the largest group in the southwest, and they were the wealthiest, and their region housed Nigeria's current capital. And the southeast was mostly made up of the Igbo people, whose land was home to much of Nigeria's massive oil reserves. Long story short, after Britain left, the three groups couldn't decide on where the capital would stay, how much autonomy everyone would get, and who would be allowed into the army. In 1966, there was a military coup, shortly followed by a counter-coup, and honestly, a lot of people were purged. Ethnic violence exploded and hundreds of thousands of Igbo people fled to the southeast, and leaders there opted to break away in 1967. The Nigerian leadership didn't accept this, and so, civil war. So why were the supporters of each side so varied? Well, the main supporter of the Nigerian government was Britain, who, as their former colonial overlord, felt passionately about the well-being of the Nigerian state, and just kidding, it was oil. British companies controlled about 90% of Nigeria's oil production, most of which went to Britain, and if the Biafran Republic had gained its independence, it may have lost said oil. As such, the British provided lots of guns and lots of money to the Lagos government. The US government wasn't too keen on all of the murder going on, but it wanted to support Britain, which meant not really getting involved. And despite America's empathy for the Igbo, if Biafra seceded, it could have potentially led to other movements springing up across Africa. And civil wars tended to see communist support rise, which meant that Biafra would get no help from the USA. Like its rivals, the Soviet government also supported Nigeria. Not for any moral reasons, but for political and economic ones. The Nigerian government was looking for some planes, which the USSR certainly had to spare, and since Britain had refused to provide them, that meant that there was money to be made. It was also hoped that help in the Civil War would improve relations with Nigeria, which was one of the most influential nations on the continent. However, the Soviets had to be smart about their support, since if they became too influential in Nigeria, they knew that the Americans would get involved. As such, they pressured Britain to provide more military aid by threatening to do it themselves if they refused. This was a bluff since they didn't actually want to do this, but it allowed Britain to believe that they were fighting communism in Africa, when in fact their continued support was keeping the United States uninvolved by making it look like that the Soviets were failing to win influence in Nigeria. As for Biafra, they had three main material supporters: France, China, and Israel. France supported the Igbo, mostly because of their deep concern for their well-being, and oh wait, no, it was also oil. France, much like Britain, had oil companies in the region, and if Biafra managed to break away, France could have got some of it. Nigerian victory also worried the French government, who saw Nigeria as being too large and populous. There were concerns that a successful Nigeria could influence France's former colonies around it and diminish its clout in the region. As for China, they had just had a very public falling out with the Soviet Union, and since the USSR was backing Nigeria, China had to do the opposite and so funneled arms to Biafra. It also helped China in trying to establish itself as an independent communist leader with its own reach and influence across the world. The last country which was deeply involved was Israel. Israel was in a tough spot, since politically siding with the Nigerian government would have helped to improve relations with the rest of the continent. Since up until this point, the vast majority of independent African states opposed Israel due to the Palestine conflict. Domestically though, the Israeli people supported the Igbo, and so Israel's government opted to help both. In the end, the support for Biafra did little, and in 1970 it was recaptured and formally reintegrated into Nigeria. And after this, the Nigerian Civil War would not only be remembered for its brutality, but also the peculiar sides that the rest of the world took in the conflict. I hope you enjoyed this episode and thank you for watching, with a special thanks to my patrons: James Bizanet, Kelly Moneymaker, Corsho Wolf, Jordan Longley, Adam Stalter, Jerry Lambdin, Marcus Arsner, YN Hockey, Words About Books Podcast, Rod D. Martin, Captain Psydog, Marvin Cassow, Gustav Swan, Spencer Lightfoot, Boogly Woogly, Camoon Yoon, Winston Kaywood, Aaron the White, Matthew Shipley, Alex Schwinn, Max and Flaudio, Maggie Patskowski, Anthony Beckett, The McWhopper, Corey Turner, Copper Tone, Spinning Three Plates, Charles I, Ben Ivinson, and Scottish Trekkie.